Hello and welcome to See You in Court, a podcast that informs you about the Georgia civil justice system, what it means to you, and how it protects individual rights. During each episode, we dive deep into stories, cases, and insights that matter to Georgians. You can learn more on our website at www.seeyouincourtpodcast.org. Join the conversation on our YouTube channel at See You in Court Podcast, and stay connected with us on our Facebook page at facebook.com/seeyouincourtpodcast. This podcast is sponsored by the Georgia Civil Justice Foundation. Your hosts are robinfrazerclark and Tate, who are both past presidents of the State Bar of Georgia and who both serve on the board of directors of the Georgia Civil Justice Foundation. And now this episode of See You in Court.
Good morning, friends and lovers of the law, and welcome to See You in Court. I'm robinfrazerclark, and with us here today is our co-host, Tate. Hey, Lester.
First show of the new year here.
It is. I'm excited. And, we're taping on Friday the 13th. Are you superstitious at all or no?
I am not. I was born on the 13th, so 13 is sort of my lucky number, and so I'm happy about it. And we got 60 degrees outside in February, so what's not to be happy about?
Yeah, I'm with you. Bill and I were married on the 13th, so it's kind of a lucky number for me too. But I tell you, my mom was from West Virginia, and that is a superstitious bunch. So she had every kind of superstition known to man. So I grew up around that, but we went for it on June 13th when we got married. So
love it.
Glad we're doing this and starting out the new year with a great lineup. And the first of a great lineup is Nick Moraitakis, who's with us today. Nick, glad to have you. I'm going to do your introduction, but we're really thrilled to have you this afternoon.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Yes, I appreciate the opportunity to spend this time with you.
Let me introduce our listeners to Nick. Nick is a native Atlantan and has lived in Atlanta all of his life. He attended public schools in DeKalb County and then worked his way through Emory College and Emory Law School. He is the first in his extended family to have graduated college. Nick was fortunate enough during college and law school to earn internships, allowing him to work in the Department of Natural Resources during Jimmy Carter's governorship and then in the United States Congress in 1975. His exposure to the operations of government and politics led him to law school and the practice of law. After graduating from Emory Law School in 1977, Nick immediately began practicing law with a defense litigation firm in downtown Atlanta. The first 14 years of Nick's practice were spent with his firm and its successor firm, representing insurance companies and self-insured corporations in the defense of tort actions in courts throughout the state of Georgia. As a defense lawyer, Nick tried dozens of cases to verdict involving automobile and truck accidents, product liability, negligent security claims, slip and fall accidents, and insurance contracts. While with his defense litigation firm, Nick also began developing a plaintiff's practice. He successfully litigated product liability cases against automobile manufacturers involving issues concerning heating and cooling systems and fuel-fed fires. Nick ran for state representative in the Georgia General Assembly and won and served one term. And then in 1993, Nick and his law partner, Glenn Cushell, began a plaintiff's practice dedicated exclusively to the representation of individuals injured or killed as a result of medical malpractice, nursing home abuse, trucking accidents, automobile accidents, product liability, premises liability, and other negligent and intentional acts. Nick also began a very successful mediation practice with Henning Mediation 16 years ago, and maintained his trial practice and mediation practice at the same time for quite a while. Nick has now turned to 100% mediation in the last 2 years. Just a few of Nick's awards include the American College of Trial Lawyers. He's a fellow with American College, an advocate with the American Board of Trial Advocates, Best Lawyers in America since 2007 to present, He's won the Tradition of Excellence Award from the General Practice and Trial section of the State Bar of Georgia. And I had forgotten about this, Nick, but I nominated you, and I was fortunate enough to introduce you in 2011 when you won that award. And he was also served as the State Bar Chair of Advisory Committee, State Bar Chair of Advisory Committee on Legislation, known as the ACL, when I was president of the State Bar. So incredible background and history and experience. And Nick, we're so honored to have you. Welcome to the show.
Well, thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to be here, and it's good to see you guys.
Good to see you.
When you read that, Robin, I want to be Nick Moraitakis when I grow up.
No kidding. You really
you grow up too fast.
Well, Nick, I wanted to share with our listeners a little bit more about how you decided to get into law. You've been practicing almost 50 years now, which is amazing in and of itself, in my opinion. You've had a storied career, first, as I said, as a defense attorney, then a plaintiff's attorney, and well-known, top of the field on both sides, and now top of the field in mediation. So tell us a little bit about what motivated you to become a lawyer in the first place and to have such an incredible practice over the last 50 years.
Well, that's very kind. I'll tell you one thing that was the icing on the cake was the D I got in biology at my freshman year at Emory. Eliminated the possibility of becoming a doctor, but I never intended to go that way anyway. I was really lucky, I guess. Like you say, I grew up in the Briarcliff High School area. I went to elementary school there and then went to high school. I grew up interested in politics and government. I was young when John Kennedy got elected, but I was old enough to recognize the difference between that and Dwight Eisenhower, and his vigor and youth and eloquence was inspiring to me, and I followed his career. I was in sixth grade when he was shot. And a lot of the books up here I have are about him and his type of politics. So I had an interest in politics first and government. And, taking you back, when I graduated high school in 1970, it was a pretty interesting political year. That was the year that Jimmy Carter was running for governor against a slew of folks, including Carl Sanders, who Jimmy labeled Cufflinks Carl, including Jeffa Tanksley, I believe Charlie's daddy, and the remarkable thing about it was it included an avowed racist by the name of J.B. Stoner and a very sharp lawyer/minister, African-American candidate from Albany by the name of C.B. King, and there were others. Well, I got retained to work with a fellow by the name of Charlie Jones. You all know Charlie Jones from Hinesville. I didn't know Charlie at the time. He was the majority whip in the House of Representatives, and he decided to run for lieutenant governor. And if I ramble on too long, just stop me. But this is a big part of why I did some of the things I did. So he ran for lieutenant governor. Now, Lester Maddox, who had just given up the governorship, ran for lieutenant governor, and Charlie Jones ran against him, as did George T. Smith, who had been lieutenant governor. So it was a wild group of folks. And Charlie's campaign slogan was "It's time to get serious," and he'd show these pictures of Lester riding his bicycle backwards and stuff like that. So, but that time, politicking was much different than now. There was television, but it wasn't the main. So there were lots of forums held all over the state, with everybody there, and
town halls,
and I was Charlie's personal aide, so I went everywhere with him. And he had a private plane, which scared the hell out of me at first, but I got used to it. But anyway, so at these forums, there'd be gubernatorial candidates, and then lieutenant gubernatorial candidates. And so I got to see some remarkable debates between Carter and Carter and Sanders on the one hand at a high level, and then you had the J.B. Stoner and C.B. King. I mean, he would say things that you and I learned as children were completely inappropriate, you know, even though there are people in government today that have forgotten those proprieties too.
Right.
But it was just a great experience. And, you know, and then from there, as you mentioned, I was fortunate enough to get an internship for the 73 and 74 legislative session working for the Department of Natural Resources. And I mean, you had some giants in the legislature at the time. You also had some characters, you know, but
Yeah.
you had Elliot Levitas, you had Sidney Marcus, Julian Bond. You had in the Senate, you had Bobby Rowan, Max Cleland, Pierre Howard, J.B. Stoner not J.B. Stoner. What was his name? Well, he was a fellow from Brunswick who was kind of a crazy person. So it was just a lot going on, and it really got me into enjoying being around politicians and thus lawyers and studying legislation. I helped create some legislation under Jimmy Carter. You know, the environment was a big deal to him, and I was in DNR in a division called Special Projects, and we were filled with a bunch of young lawyers or college kids and law school students who put together a lot of his bills, the Chattahoochee River Bill, the Sand Dunes Bill, these type of things that were really meaningful, and it had its effect on me. That was what got me started about it.
So I'm, you know, in some ways, you and I had a similar career. You know, I interned down there, worked in D.C. for Buddy Darden, and a little bit behind you. But it's been said before that if war is diplomacy by other means, that trials and court is politics by other means.
Yeah.
True or false?
Yeah, except more civil.
Yes.
You know, thanks to the judge. You know, I mean, there's the rules are a little tougher. You have real rules. Politics, particularly today, as we all know, it's freewheeling out there. And I went to Washington too with Elliot Levitas in 1975, the summer between my first and second year of law school. And again, there were some huge heavyweight folks in the Capitol at that time. It was shortly after Nixon, of course, had resigned. Watergate. You know, we went through Watergate, sat in fraternity house watching those hearings instead of going to class. It was just an education in how government works, and there was it was, you know, law was natural for me. It was a natural. I studied history. I political science major at Emory, but it was just a place that I felt comfortable.
It sounds like you know, if you've read Wild Man from Sugar Creek, you know, Eugene Talmadge talking about his rallies that they had where he would ride to the edge of town and then get in the back of the pickup truck, ride on in. You know, it sounds like you caught the end of the great rally era of Georgia politics.
Yeah. I mean, you know, we had Sloppy Floyd was in the legislature. You know, that was when Tom Murphy, that second year in between 73 and 74, George L. Smith was the speaker, and he died in the interim, and Tom Murphy became Speaker of the House in 1975, 74, that session. So there were, it was a fun time.
When did you get the bug of, I want to run for office?
Well,
I mean, was it back early on? Like,
yeah,
when you were
well, I was, you know, in high school, I was the president of my class every year, and then ultimately president of the student body. The first time I'd never thought I would do it. And then in 1972, no, I'm sorry. So Elliott got elected in 74. And in 1986 or 84, he got beat by Pat Swindle. You remember Pat?
Sure.
I was in DC at that time. Yeah.
Yeah. And Pat went to Briarcliff High School. He was 2 years older than me, but I mean, I knew who Pat was. We who knew him, I was in the Key Club with him. I mean, and so when he beat Elliott and just was so cocky about it, I thought, well, I'm going to give some thought to running against this guy the next time. And I did think about it, but that was when I first considered it seriously. And as a matter of fact, Pierre Howard talked to me about it. And the problem was my wife and I were going through reproductive biology treatment at that time, and it just wasn't the right time. So
Ben Jones beat him, as I recall.
Ben Jones beat him, right?
From the
Dukes of Hazzard
TV show.
Dukes of Hazzard. He was Cooter.
Yes,
he was Cooter. Now, if you want me to, I mean, I can go one step further. So Ben runs, and so I decided I would run against Ben. So that was my first race, was when I ran in the Democratic primary against Ben Jones. The problem was I was really a novice. I had some good support, raised a decent amount of money. Of course, you didn't need millions of dollars back then. $200,000 or $300,000 would be plenty. But I just didn't appreciate how much, two things. Number one, how much the name recognition meant. Because Ben had a lot of goodwill for beating Swindle, and sure enough, he beat me. That's my other claim to fame, is getting beaten in an election by Cooter from the Dukes of Hazzard. I wear that label.
You hadn't lived the highs and lows of life until you've lost an election and won a jury trial.
That's well put. Well put.
Well, then later, a bit later in your career, you do run again for the Georgia House. You get elected. Talk to us about that. To me, it seems so hard to maintain a law practice as you were and serve in the legislature. That seems so difficult.
Well, I'll tell you, you're right. And I ran, that's when Roy Barnes redrew the maps. We were running on redrawn maps, and he created, I lived in the heart of Buckhead, right down off of Club Drive, up here, and Republicans, so I didn't really give any thought to the state legislature, although Roy Barnes, they redrew the maps and created these multi-member districts. And mine was one. We had 4 people in that district. It was me, Kathy Ash, Doug Teeper, and Pat. I always have trouble remembering Pat's last name. She lived in Morningside. But the district ran all the way from Sandy Springs down to the Georgia Dome, and then over to where I grew up in Briarcliff, La Vista area, Druid Hills, Emory, Morningside. So it picked up, Democrats. So it made 4 districts that were really right about 50-50 Democrat and Republican, where it would have been impossible for me to win in the place where I was. To answer your question, Robin, we had like 30 lawyers in the legislature at that time. And it was, it was a hard time, because remember, Roy Barnes lost. Sonny Perdue became governor. Sonny Perdue flipped several of the Democrats in the Senate to become Republicans. So the only Democratic control there was in the House of Representatives. And it was also a year when they took a real stab at tort reform. But point is, if you're a lawyer, and we only had about 30 lawyers in the legislature at the time, if you're a lawyer and one that can do good work, you get pulled in every direction. You know what I mean? You go down there with an agenda for your constituents. But as a lawyer, you're going to, somebody's got a favorite bill they want, and they say, "Hey, come here, you're a lawyer, right?" And, next thing you know, you're helping them write the bill. Then you're explaining it to them, and so it was busy. It was very, very busy and very contentious because we were fighting tort reform, the flag, teachers' salaries. It was hard. I was not there long enough, frankly, to learn how to manage that and my practice at the same time. I would go in on the weekends and get done what I could, but you can't. It's hard to do.
I know that folks would grab you and say, "You're a lawyer, right?" I have always heard, and we're good friends with our representative. She was also our Senator, Mary Margaret Oliver, who's a lawyer. And she talks about lawyers get a lot of respect. Interestingly, there's not very many of them in the legislature, but the ones who are there do get sort of a natural respect because the non-lawyers look up to them like they must know what they're talking about. Did you experience that?
Oh yeah. And as a matter of fact, I sat on the first row, one seat away from Mary Margaret, and the person that sat between us seemed to miss a good many sessions. So Mary Margaret and I were friends anyway. You know what I mean?
Sure.
I mean,
Yeah.
we were buddies because she, when she ran the first time for the legislature, I got to know her, and and she was a great source. And I'm sure that some people thinking that I might have known what I was doing was in part because I was a friend of hers. But keep in mind too, I was the legislative chairman for the Georgia trial lawyers the 4 years before I ran. So they knew me down there.
You knew a lot of folks in the legislature.
I did. I knew a lot
you
of
were probably down there almost every day.
Yeah, back then we were,
Yeah.
The other thing with lawyers in the legislature is we have from time to time over the years, I won't call any names, had some not very good lawyers get elected to the legislature. And some of them was my observation. I'd be interested in hearing what you think, Nick, but some of them from time to time get that respect too. And the folks don't really know they're not getting the non-lawyers don't know they're not getting a good opinion, if you will.
No, that's true. And you said it first. I was kind of shying away from it, but you're right. There are a lot of lawyers who are a politician before they're a lawyer.
Mm-hmm.
And they put that first. Those of us who are successful lawyers in the legislature, have a way of keeping a better equilibrium in our lives. And you do run into folks like that. And there is, or at least when I was there still was sort of an air of respect, and you don't want to embarrass. Just like in a mediation, I don't want to embarrass a lawyer in front of his client or her client if I know that they've done something wrong. I'll wait till I grab them and get them in another room. But there's a hesitancy to be too obnoxious and call that as you see it publicly, at least when I was in the legislature.
You mentioned that when you served in the legislature, there were 30 lawyers. I did not check to see the number we have currently, but I think it may be less than 30.
I think
now.
I didn't check it either, but it's in that neighborhood. It ain't much more if it is.
It's not, no.
I'd bet it was in the teens if I were.
I think it might be maybe 20. I'm kind of guessing now, but
that's really too bad.
It's really bad, but given people's law practices, I kind of understand. But is there something we could do to get more lawyers to run for office?
That's a good question. I frankly haven't given it much thought. I mean, it once you're there, it no, I mean, it keeps you, it makes your life a lot fuller, busier.
Yeah.
I guess the most likely suspects are probably some of the older ones who are cutting back some. But I mean, nowadays, I mean, I'm 74. When I turned 70, I turned around and went, "Where did the '60s go?" Right. So when you're 60, you're still working hard.
I, I,
You're still at
that's
the top of
me.
your game. Yeah, you're
Yeah.
busy. You got big cases. I
That's
try.
Lester. Yep.
Yeah. So it's there's just not an answer for that, I don't
It's
think.
hard. It's hard. I want to talk a little bit about your mediation practice. You are highly sought after mediator. And I was talking to Bill about this, my husband, and I said, one of the great things about Nick is that both defense attorneys suggest him and both plaintiff's attorneys suggest him. So whenever your name comes up, it's very easy to get up, to say, yes, we agree to use Nick Moraitakis. And I think it's because you had such a storied career as a defense attorney, very well known in that, and then you flip the page and you have a storied career as a plaintiff's attorney. You know both sides very, very well. Talk to us about why you wanted to get involved in mediation and what you think your experience as both a defense attorney and a plaintiff's attorney have brought to your mediation practice.
I tell you, I got involved in it, frankly, after I had a health scare when I was 58 years old. And I was thinking, well, I may want to slow this litigation practice down. It was a hard issue. As a matter of fact, it was a week before you introduced me at
Yeah,
in Myrtle Beach for the
I,
award.
I
Um,
remember.
and so I said, I want to take this mediation course and kind of get ready. And it just didn't work out. The slowing down just didn't work out as I had hoped. And so, but I figured, at some point I'm going to retire, and now I have. And the fact is, my golf game is not good enough to keep me busy, like yours and Bill's may be. Um, and I love to read. I love the family. I've got grandkids now that I enjoy, who are young, but I'm not a huge traveler. So I do believe you have to keep your mind busy, and it's a good way for me to do it, and using the skills that I have to another purpose. I do. You're right. I'm fortunate. When I first went out, there were certain insurers who were uh, reluctant to use me. There may still be, but the defense lawyers that I've dealt with, and I've always tried to be respectful of the other side. I appreciate what defense lawyers do. They're busy as they can be. You know what I mean? And I was there one time. I
Right.
know what they're up against. It's gotten much worse than when I left it in 1992, 93. But so I think the fact that I've got a little bit of medical background, our firm has done a lot of medical stuff. Glenn
Sure.
was more often than not the lead dog, and I was at first the gray hair and now the lack of hair. But I think that helps because there aren't that many people who have done medical much who are mediating. And so I tend to get a fair amount of that. Probably a fairly large percentage of my mediations now is that.
Is medical malpractice.
A good bit, yeah,
Yeah.
and it's hard. It's tough. I mean, those are tough.
They're tough and complicated. I think the last one you mediated for me was, I don't know if you remember, my client tore both his rotator cuffs on a bus. He was a Delta employee, and
Yeah,
bus had a wreck. And
we got that done finally.
yes, sir, we sure did, and I
Yeah,
appreciate your help
yeah.
on that. But
But it's
that's a prime
changing a lot, though. Mediation changing a lot.
yeah, and I mean, I'm really glad you're still in it and still doing it, because I do think you understand both sides, and you can you can give each lawyer on each side the pros and the cons. You've been there.
Yeah.
You know.
Well, and people don't appreciate, so many people who haven't dealt with plaintiffs as their lawyer, as we have, don't appreciate really the stress that the what I'll call the rookie in the room, the plaintiffs,
the client.
have when going through. They don't appreciate that. You know what I mean? And
Yeah.
certainly the other side oftentimes doesn't appreciate it. The insurance carriers, they don't really. Some of them do, some of them don't, but most of them, I mean, that's not their concern. I get it, but I think it helps if you've had experience with plaintiffs in dealing with the plaintiff's room too.
So
Sure.
I'm gonna get some free advice while I've got you here.
Okay. Well,
today.
let's see. Well, we'll see how free it is, but that's okay. I mean, I'm
It
yours
might
right
only be
now.
worth what I'm paying, right? So no, just by pure accident, I have my Harvard law school jacket on today, and I've always it can't, if you didn't go to Harvard, it's not pretentious to wear a Harvard law school thing, but I went up there I guess the week before Thanksgiving, and I did their mediator training, having never done mediation or whatever before. And but I thought, well, it might be something I want to do, but I still worry about how hard is it to take off that advocacy hat and then put on that, I'm a little bit neutral. It's not exactly like being a referee. I remember reading where Lewis Powell, once somebody thought he had a great job being on the Supreme Court, and he said he had never been a judge before, and he said, "No, I hate it." He said, "Why?" And he said, "Well, who wants to referee when you can play?" So
Yeah.
what's the most difficult part of that?
I don't. I don't. This is where I come in on the changing. I mean, first of all, that didn't really bother me that much. I mean, I knew what I gathered. I was pretty quick to appreciate that I had to be patient.
Mhm.
That's the hard part. And I know some guys who may be a bit like you, who may not have the patience for it because of their, you know what I mean? And I'm not suggesting that's you, but I've got some of my best friends that I play golf with, they're defense lawyers, and and they say, I don't know how you take it. I don't know how you have the patience for that. That's the main characteristic that you've got to have. Now, you also have to let people know when they're off base. And, frequently plaintiffs can be off base, with the results that we've seen in Georgia. Sometimes I see demands from plaintiffs that it's just not going to start anywhere,
Mhm.
and I'm not afraid to tell them that. And what I do find frustrating is, and I tell people when I get them in a mediation and that they don't know me, I say, look, I started practicing before there were fax machines. Okay. And some of these young lawyers will look at me like, what? But it's true.
What's a
And
fax machine?
yeah, exactly. But likewise, I started practicing before we mediated, right?
Right.
And in the old days, you didn't go to mediation once it came about until you had tried to settle amongst yourselves and couldn't get to it and reached a point where, okay, we need a mediator's help, right? And so lawyers spoke to one another. They were honest with each other, as honest as they could be. Now, plaintiff sends a demand, defendant says, I'll mediate or not. And yeah, that's the way you enter. And so I find that the lawyers very seldom, there are some, but very seldom have much serious conversation about settlement before we get into mediation. And so it puts a lot of pressure, uh, and has resulted in my experience being, I don't know about other folks, that I'm seeing more cases that don't settle on the day of. Now I stay on them. I settled one the other day that had, 6 parties in it that we mediated 7 or 8 months ago. We finally got it done, but that's becoming more and more and I've talked with other mediators about that too. We're all seeing a bit more of that than we used to. I don't know that I answered your question, but
No, I'm going to go back and listen to this podcast again and take notes. I think that's all great advice, and
well,
particularly for somebody who doesn't have a lot of patience. That's
it can be frustrating, and sometimes you know I mean, sometimes you get people that just come, particularly on the defense side, that their idea of mediating is coming to pay what they want to pay and expect me to go get it settled for that, and that's when it gets a little frustrating.
Yeah, or their idea of mediation is coming to have a cup of coffee, and then they're
Yeah.
gone.
get the
Yeah.
They leave.
$5,000 taco.
Yeah. Yeah.
I've done that a time or two, but I also think, to your point, Nick, that when you're in this trial practice like Robin and I are, and you were, and you come to a point where any one of us could come and say, I've got this case and here's what the facts are. And, what do you think that case is worth? And you get to the point where you can, you might get three different answers, but they're not going to be that far off. You get where you know how to value a case. And so then, to me, it's sort of the beginning of wisdom. Once you learn how to value that case and you go in there and think, why doesn't everybody else see it that way? They don't. And if you try to, it's like trying to, trying to cook soup or stew too quick. It just, that you can't accelerate the process. You got to let the
No,
process play out.
no, sometimes you really do. You really do have to let people get tired and get the process play out. Now, people ask me sometimes, they say, what do you think this case is worth? And I say, it doesn't matter what I think it's worth. I'll tell you what it's worth today. I'll tell them it's worth the maximum the defense is going to pay and the least that the plaintiff is willing to take. And hopefully that's the same number. So part of the process, as I view it, and I don't never really talked too much about this before. I sort of view my role as figuring out where people are headed. And, I've been doing it long enough now that by their moves,
Yeah.
I can begin to get a sense. And then I start challenging them on, are we not going to something that starts with X? And trying to get some feel from them. And I have found that to be a fairly successful way to handle defendants. Plaintiffs are a bit easier. I've got plaintiffs lawyers, who kind of level with me and in front of their clients from the get-go. I don't really see that much on the other side, although there are some. But I can pretty much tell if a mediation is going to be successful within the first few moves. And if not, then I push to see if I could get them that way, but you still have to be patient. Some people just want to play it out. Does that make sense? I mean,
Yeah, it makes a
the
lot of sense.
idea is figuring out where they're trying to go and seeing if you're on a road that's going to meet or if it's never going to meet. And that's kind of my mission as I see it.
Yeah. You mentioned that you started practicing back as trial lawyers. When we did not mediate, I didn't even know what mediation was. I know you didn't have mediation when you first started practicing. Lester and I didn't do mediations when we first started practicing, and then it started becoming a thing. And now, you may not be able to get a trial date unless you can show the judge you've mediated.
That's right.
I'm wondering what you've observed from going from a trial lawyer with nobody mediated. You just went and you got a trial date and tried your case, to now most cases are mediated. Even when the ones that are tried, they've probably been mediated. Your observations in the change of how that's affected trial law, how has it affected professionalism of lawyers? I worry about that. This not talking, not picking up the phone to negotiate. That's crazy to me. And so you're seeing that play out. I can't believe that's very professional of lawyers not to do that. What are your observations?
Well, I see it more than you would think. Mainly a lot of times because, you know, people who represent the carriers don't often know what they're going to, you know what I mean? Which I find crazy. I
Right.
mean,
Their
you know,
client won't tell them what
right,
authority
right,
they have.
right.
Yeah.
So that's a problem. I mean,
Yeah.
you know, but I get it. I mean, I know I know they do that. But that's the biggest problem I see. And because they really don't know. I've got one I mediated for a hospital here earlier this year. And I've got the plaintiff down to where I know the defense lawyer thinks it's good, but he has no clue on whether or not the client's going to be willing to pay it. And he's pessimistic about it. I mean, when I practiced defense law, we gave recommendations to our insurance companies, and they generally took
They took them.
advice, you know.
Yeah.
I mean,
Sure.
you know, now that's an aberration. I mean, that's
Right.
not practicing law.
That's
Really.
crazy.
I went to a mediation a few years ago where there were two defense lawyers there, one defense client, two defense lawyers there, and the claims person fired one of the lawyers in the middle of the mediation because didn't like what he was saying, you know. And I'm like, I've never
Oh
heard of
my
this
gosh.
before, you
Well,
know.
good for him.
Yeah, right. He was correct. Well,
But
that's
I will say
interesting.
this, Robin, even in cases where they're there because the court wants them to be there,
Uh-huh.
I'm not finding any large percentage where that really affects the outcome. You know, if they come, most of them come, you know, with their own concept of trying to get it done.
Yeah.
Sometimes those concepts don't meet, but I don't see that as being, you know, I know when mediation first started, and I'd go to mediate with Art, and that was one of the first questions he asked: "Are we here by order of court, or are we here by agreement?" Well, there's not
Uh-huh.
much sense in asking that anymore because it's in every scheduling order, just about,
Yes.
right?
Right.
But generally, if they've been through the process and they get to a point where, okay, all we got left is experts and we know what they're going to say, you know, they're there to do business. You know, I found for the most part. Query on pre-litigation mediation. I'm seeing a fair amount of that.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, it's the only time that's successful is when the plaintiff's got somebody in a
Dead to rights.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. We hear a lot about the vanishing jury trial, that very few jury trials anymore compared to when you first started, I think of my boss, Tom Carlock. He would talk about taking a red file down that fit under his arm, just carried it in and tried a case. I mean, that was very common back then.
Yeah.
Do you attribute, if it's true that there's a vanishing of jury trials, do you attribute that to mediation and the success of mediation?
I don't know. I think that there's a lot of reasons for that. One is things have gotten so much more complicated. Who can go down and try a case with one red well folder anymore? You know,
Nobody.
sometimes, you know,
Yeah.
you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
You know, when I was a defense lawyer, I tried 20 cases in 1 year. You know, none of them were huge, but, you know, I walked from Peachtree Center down to the Fulton County Courthouse and,
Yeah.
you know, with a briefcase and tried them, you know,
Sure.
and now they're just medical cases are tougher. The products liability cases are bigger. You know, I don't, the smaller cases, I think there's, I don't know what these young guys in defense firms are doing now, but I don't think they're trying the kind of cases that I tried. You know what I mean? I don't think they
Sure.
try small cases anymore, you know, 5-figure cases, low 6-figure cases much, you know? I mean, the
Yeah.
cases that get tried are more often than not, I think, just bigger cases. And they are
Well,
fewer.
it also, do you think it also affects the lawyer training? You know, there always been sort of two models of training lawyers. And, you know, one is the sort of, it's really sort of the big firm model. Okay, well, you're going to work on this piece of the case and you'll fourth chair me and third chair me, and we'll let you argue a motion, and eventually you get to try a case. And then, for most of us, I think all three of us started, doing insurance defense. That's sort of every Marine or rifleman. You get the you get the $5,000 chiropractic case, and then you just kind of move up. And I think but we're talking about a BOTA. When I got in, I came in as an advocate because I had over 50 trials, at that point. And now if there are those lower end on the civil cases, the only sort of equivalent to that, and there are a lot of prosecutors and public defenders, trying cases, but they're sort of different kind of cases. I mean, I've tried both. I've tried civil and criminal, but they're kind of different. But a lot of those are in-house lawyers with, State Farm, Allstate, Progressive, whoever else that are trying those.
Yeah, no, you're right. I think that's very true. I did
just talking about it reminded me of my very first jury trial, which I don't know, might have been in 88, 89, but it was in front of Jerry Baxter. And it was a one day, I was a defense attorney, for State Farm or something. And one day they only had chiropractic, and they just put in the bills, didn't even call, no expert to testify, put in the bills, had the plaintiff testify. And that was it, one day. And that's the kind of stuff we tried. And we, it was defense verdict. And I was so new, I didn't even know you had to write a judgment. And Jerry Baxter helped me write it out by hand on paper. We wrote a judgment. I'm like, okay. Oh, not to brag about how old I am, but there you go. We wrote a judgment out by hand.
Yeah, that's right.
Well,
go ahead.
I want to talk about. I want to talk about some. You've had some famous cases, and I think everyone would agree. Famous is a correct word for some of the cases that you've handled. And I want to talk about a couple of them because I want our listeners to hear not only how you represented these folks in cases that never, ever should have happened, but how hard it was for you to get to the bottom of a lot of stuff and win the case for your client, which you did. The first one I want to talk about, a famous case. It was the fatal 2006 shooting of Kathryn Johnston. She was a 92-year-old woman. And this involved the Atlanta Police Department narcotics investigators who were called the Red Dog Unit. And as I'll just tell the story I recall, is they burst into her home and unannounced, obviously, break the door down. She has a gun. She's in her home. She tries to protect herself, and then they shoot her and kill her. And then at some point later, it might have been that night, the Red Dog Unit, the police, plant drugs or create a false story to make it look like they had the right to kill her. That is, and then you represented her family.
Kathryn Johnston had no husband or children. She had a sister, and then she had a brother who had passed away and had adult children. The sister was represented by Hezekiah Sistrunk and Sean Williams, with the Cochran firm. And I was hired by the family of the brother. So, we all knew each other. So Glenn and me and Hezekiah and Sean went to lunch and decided, that we would just share it, and handle it together, which was really great.
Smart.
Yeah, it was really great. Because there were a lot of issues, there were a lot of depositions that needed to be taken. And, we spread the work around, and at the end of the day, it's settled, but I'm glad to talk to you about it. You want me to kind of outline?
Yeah, it's just such a great case. It's horrible what happened to Miss Johnston, obviously, and never should have happened. But, my understanding is your work for that family ultimately resulted in the elimination of the Red Dog unit. They had gone too far. This was the event that made everybody realize, okay, they're out of control. So you not only obtained a very large settlement for the family, justifiably, but you also your work also had a hand in reform of the Atlanta Police Department. Not a lot of, Nick, not a lot of lawyers get to say they did stuff like that. So,
And I want to know too who found the cover up. That's
Well,
yeah,
I'm going to start at
in
the
there, Robin's
beginning. And
question.
the Red Dog, I'm not sure if it was, there were two units that did drugs, and they were kind of playing with them at the time. And I know that they dismantled the whole way they were doing things. And I don't know if it was the Red Dog unit that was technically dismantled because of the case or not. What happened was this, keep in mind that there was a case called Monell versus the city of New York, which basically gives the city immunity for just rogue cops. That's not good enough. You can sue the police officer, but that's not going to get you anywhere. So in order to keep the city in play, which is where the money was, we had to show that what these officers did was part of the policy of the police department. Okay. No, that's hard to prove. And it was a hurdle for us. We got getting something on my computer here. So what happened was this is the process. So these police officers, there were three of them. They were investigators. They were high level folks. But one of them was a sergeant, and he was like the boss of them. Three of them, they worked in threes. And so two of them, these guys all went to jail for significant time, like federal court time.
I couldn't remember. I wondered about that.
No, they went to jail. One of them got 9 years. I think one of them got 12 years. And I think one got like 18 years. Judge Carnes in the federal district court sentenced them. We were there. But, so they approached us through their lawyers. Two of them did. And they wanted to tell us the truth as they saw it, okay, from their perspective. And so that was really big because it gave us the theory to go on the fact that this was the way the police operated. It wasn't just them not doing what they're supposed to be doing. And it came down to this, in a nutshell. There was an unwritten quota for these units, the drug units, to have an amount of arrests, drug cases per month. Okay. And it was 3 per group, per division or whatever they called themselves. Now, and then it was the week before or the week of Thanksgiving that this happened. So the end of the month was nearing, and this team needed one more drug arrest, right? So they're riding through the neighborhood down where Miss Johnson lived, and they run across one of their CIs, one of their confidential informants, who they knew well. And they go, and I think he was smoking pot or selling some pot on the corner or something like that. They get him in the car and they go, "Hey man, you're on parole. We're going to run you in." And I'm short circuiting it, and so they say, "Now, but if you can point us to a place where somebody is dealing heavy duty drugs, and we make an arrest, you can go." And so that's what he did. He gave them an address. Now it was different than the address of Miss Johnson's home. It was like a street difference. And so these guys then, in order to get a no-knock warrant, Robin, you mentioned they did bust their door down. Now,
Mhm.
unless you're the ICE folks in Minnesota, that's tough to do. And so you got to go present a warrant to the magistrate that not only did you have a tip from a CI, but that you sent somebody in to make a buy, and they made a buy, and they didn't do step 2.
No.
But they said in the affidavit to the
They
judge,
lied in the affidavit.
lied in the affidavit. So sure enough, they're in the wrong house. They go in. She does have a gun. I think she shot it into the air, and they unloaded on her and killed her. And then when they realized that they had made a mistake that evening, they did take drugs and put them in her basement. And they lied about everything. And then the FBI got involved. The FBI went to see the CI. And that's when he said, "No mas, I'm not playing this game."
Right.
He came clean to answer your question, Lester. You know what I mean? He's the one that spilled the beans. And from there, it was just rolling. And so fortunately, these two of the guys who went on and pled guilty and were waiting on sentencing, reached out to us through their lawyer. And me and Sean went and met with them separately on 2 different occasions and spent the entire day with both of them. And they basically gave us the roadmap to raising the issue with some credibility that this quota system was in place. Everybody knew about it, even though it wasn't written in stone. There were emails that referenced it, which they were able to identify for us. And there were people who they believed would confess to it under oath if asked the right questions. They gave us all that information, and we were able to ask for documents that we knew they had, that they were,
Mhm.
you know what I mean? That they
Mhm.
didn't. Once they saw the request, they knew we were on to something, and then we did get stuff that was detrimental to the city's position, and we deposed everybody. I mean, we deposed everybody in the unit. We deposed every colonel, every sergeant, every lieutenant, the chief of police, who I believe fell ill shortly after we took his deposition. And we deposed the members of the council who were on the safety committee. And we turned up sufficient evidence to convince, in our minds, a jury and the judge that there was this quota system, even if it wasn't an official policy. So we got affidavits from these 2 guys, as well as reference to the depositions. We retained Bill Mitchell to help us because he was a specialist in municipal stuff. And we filed the first motion for summary judgment. We filed a motion for summary judgment aggressively, saying Manel doesn't apply to this case.
Yeah.
Let's go to the jury trial.
Yeah.
Well, they filed their cross motion, and the city had moved to remove the case. Unfortunately for them, Justice Marvin Shue got the case.
Oh.
Yeah, and
Good.
we had a pretrial, a hearing over the phone, and he said he thought it would be. Basically, he said, "You guys, I want you to mediate this case before I rule on this motion, because somebody's not going to like the outcome." And neither one of us knew which one he was talking about.
Right. The guys that the officers who, through their lawyers, approached you to give you this evidence, were they doing it because of their conscience, or were they doing it because they hope it would give them a better sentence?
I think with one of them it was both, and with the other one it was just the latter, the better sentence.
Gotcha.
And that didn't help that much, to be honest with you. I mean,
Yeah.
they got hit pretty hard, although they did a bad thing.
Sure.
And then then we went to mediate it, and at Henning, as a matter of fact. And anyway, long story short, long story short, it was Glazer was the mediator, and we were showing back then. It was a lot. It was public knowledge, so the settlement was 4.9 million, and it was in the newspaper, and we were going back and forth, and we were showing 5 million as a midpoint throughout the day. They
Mhm.
came in and they go, look, we don't have that much money in this year's budget. We'll give you half of it now and half of it in next year's budget. But we're no way are we paying $5 million. We've got more than, I think they're offered 2 million or something. And so we said, okay, we'll give it some thought. And I told Art says, well, Nick, I think you can get 4 million for this. And I said, no, I think we can get 4.9 million. I mean, I worked with the city. I was chairman of the zoning review board, for the city for a while. And I mean, I know what we can't get 5 million means,
Yeah.
and
that's what with Art, I can hear Art saying, you want something that feels like 5 million, which would be 4.9.
Yeah.
It may not start with a 5, but
right.
it might as well.
And it was they didn't bat an eye. They didn't bat an eye. So
Yeah.
that's
Well,
the story.
great case, great result for that family.
Oh, one last thing on that side.
Yeah.
I called the court. The court called me and said they understood, or maybe I left a message that we settled the case. No need to proceed. We'll get dismissals to you. And the judge's clerk calls me back. Judge Shoe's clerk, big, office clerk, calls and says, yeah, Mr. Moraitakis, we saw that in the newspaper that it settled. And, the judge was just surprised with the amount. And I said, well, did he think it was too low? And she said, no. So it made me feel, as good as I could about settling it. But it was one of those cases, but it could have gone either way legally.
Well, if you had Marvin Shube, though, I'm pretty confident how that
Yeah.
summary judgment motion was going to
Yeah, I would
turn out.
Yeah.
Let me talk about another what I would call famous case. Was the sinkhole in 1993, the sinkhole disaster at the Marriott Courtyard Hotel in Midtown Atlanta. That was a huge case, and I was a defense attorney at Swift Curry at the time. I don't know if Swift Curry had any part of that case, but basically, I think every law firm in city of Atlanta was defending somebody in your case, and you represented the husband of a woman who died in the sinkhole.
So I represented, there were two people who died. One was a Guatemalan male and a Russian woman. The Russian woman's husband hired Nick Chilevis, the Chilevis's firm. And then I was retained by Oscar Cano's wife. He was from Guatemala. And he drowned. He was walking. It was really kind of sad. It's well, did you have a specific question?
No, I want to talk about the case because some of our listeners will remember it. Some probably don't know anything about it, our younger folks. But it was such a big event in the city of Atlanta, in Midtown. And it was, as we've talked to you and I before about the case, it presented to you as the plaintiff's counsel very complicated array of issues, scientific, geological. You had to have all kinds of different experts, geotechnical engineering. It is just an unbelievable case. But the case was a sinkhole opened up in the parking lot of this Marriott Courtyard. And I've read a little bit about it, how they had signs that it was happening. Signs, and they were ignored. And then it happens predictably because they didn't do the right job on it, and people are killed. But it's a famous case that you represented one of the families who died.
Yeah, we worked together on that as well too. And that was one where we took so many depositions that we set aside a week every month to take depositions, some of which would last a whole week. I'll tell you, so what happened was the sewer collapsed. Sinkhole is technically not the correct name nomenclature, but that's okay. So
Okay.
everybody called it. That's what I call it. That's but first of all, my partner Roger Mills and I, Roger was our first partner, Glenn, with me and Glenn and Roger, and we were up in Detroit getting ready to take a deposition of an automotive engineer regarding a product defect case we were handling, and we were staying in a Marriott, and Marriott at that time would shift USA Today papers under the door when you stayed there. I don't think they do that anymore, but both Roger and I got up early to get ready, to go and take this deposition, and there's a picture on the front page of USA Today about this sinkhole, and it looked like a crater. It was you had the size of it. It was huge.
Huge.
It was like 100 feet wide and 25.
100 feet wide and 25 feet deep.
Yeah, and
Good Lord.
the Russian lady's car fell through, and she got stuck in her car. To get her out, they had to cut her legs off. My guy Oscar Cano got run through the sewer and ended up in Tanyard Creek over off Collier Road by
Wow.
Piedmont. What a horrible death he died.
Awful.
And so long story short, we got back, and Roger, I said, well, somebody's going to end up with a pretty big lawsuit here. And it ended up being us. But here's the deal. These folks were both immigrant families, typical for so many plaintiffs. They were in despair. They were downtrodden. They were suffering. And it took them a while to figure out what to do. They our client hardly spoke English. And so it took a while for them to retain counsel. And by the time we got involved, all the geotechnical engineers, Georgia Tech, you can forget about it. I mean, they had everybody over there, the defendants did, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so all the engineers in the neighborhood were gone. So that was our first idea, was where were we going to find a geotechnical engineer? Because I didn't even know what it was, to be honest with you. It's the first time I've handled anything like that. But we got a great guy by the name of, I made a couple of notes, but Dr. Milton Haar, he was head of the geotechnical engineering department at Purdue University. And he really taught us a lot. And then fortunately enough, my brother-in-law was a mechanical engineer over in Columbia, and he came over. The defendants were quite good about getting us everything we needed, the original drawing. And so Marriott was desperate to get into Midtown, and they took a look at this property, and first they rejected it. There's notices. I mean, this was unbelievable what the document showed. You may not remember this, but about 3 years before this happened, the exact same thing happened next door on a smaller scale. Collapse of that sewer. The sewer, known as the Orm Street Trunk, was built in the very early 1900s, and it was built in huge concrete. It was a huge concrete cylinder. You could drive a car through it. There were pictures in the paper of car, and you could fit a car and just drive it through. They were so big, but it was intended to cover up sewage being flushed from downtown into the creeks, which led to the water, where Waterworks ended up on 14th Street.
Yeah.
And so it was interesting for me because it was a study of Atlanta. So over the years, with the construction of 85, they're just dumping dirt on top of this trunk for years. Well, the trunk was not designed to handle that kind of pressure.
Mm-hmm.
They do that. They discovered that, and it eventually became what they call a CSO, a combined sewer, so that not only was it handling all the sewage, but it was handling the water runoff during rain. And so there were times when there were hard rains, as there were this morning on the day they died, that it was running like a river through this old concrete structure, which was not designed to take the pressure. So over the years, Georgia Tech sewers in Georgia Tech were blowing off the tops from the pressure when it would rain hard, and those engineering students found a way to cap them. Likewise, Georgia Tech Stadium was AstroTurf at the time. When it rained hard, the AstroTurf would bubble up. So this was known by people who should know. And Marriott came back to the property, and we got their minutes. And they talked specifically in their board meeting about the trunk, about the sewer.
Wow.
And they made the decision to put, well, we'll tell you what we'll do. Because there's one other thing. Ted Turner had thought about expanding CNN on that property a couple of years before Marriott came in. And, that was before he went down to CNN, because he had the property next door where the old Progressive Club was located, and he wanted to expand over. He hired excellent engineers. They did their homework. They went into the trunk with the city engineers, took pictures of the cracked floors and the leaks. And the engineering report, and the engineering report who wrote it, she was with the city at the time, wrote specifically, or she was hired by the city, nothing should be built near this sewer that would require significant construction work ever again.
Wow.
And so their solution was, well, I'll tell you what we'll do. This was the first courtyard that wasn't like an old courtyard, two small buildings and a courtyard in the middle. It was a high rise, the first in the country. And why did they do that? To take the people, take the hotel and put it on the Stone Mountain granite, which was on the site, and put the parking lot over the sewer. And in their plans, you could see the word pointed to this little thing underneath the ground, said safety net. Well, that as something like that does, that got our attention.
Yeah.
And so what they did to solve the problem was hired Tensar, who was a defendant. Tensar manufactures those meshes you see on construction sites, the orange mesh to keep the flow of soil coming into the road. So they went and commissioned Tensar to build a safety net, which would hold underneath the parking lot. And if a crack occurred, it would slowly trickle up the funnel up, but it would be enough for the safety net would hold it for 4 days. And in that time period, there'd be enough cracks in the parking lot that people should know they needed to call somebody. Well, it didn't work and furthermore, there were some cracks, but they never told anybody at the Marriott about the safety net and the 4-day thing. And so, and I can stop, but or I can finish the story. I don't want to dominate the conversation. It gets even stranger. The head of City of Atlanta Public Works was notified on Thursday. This happened on Monday morning, 6:00 a.m. about these cracks. He went down in the sewer and came out with all kind of witnesses around him, Marriott employees and city employees, and said that they had cracks before, and they used a company out of Tennessee to come spray gunite and patch over the cracks. And he comes up and he goes, I forget the name of the company. Where's those guys? We need them here right away. And they get on the phone, they call them, they say, they're doing a job out of town. They're not going to be able to get here till Monday. And the head of the Public Works for the City of Atlanta says, we may not have until Monday, in front of all these witnesses. And sure
And
enough,
yet they didn't do anything between that day and Monday. And then
no, they put up some yellow signs or something that didn't
Wow.
mean anything to anybody. They were lucky. It was summer graduation for Tech. We left. The hotel was pretty full. It was a good thing it was early in the morning.
Yeah.
And
So, one of the things about this, Nick, that I just got to stop you for a moment to point this out, because we talked about Kathryn Johnston, and we're talking about the 93 sinkhole disaster there. So these are the kind of things that if you're not a trial lawyer, or if you're a young trial lawyer, sort of starting out, you think, hell, the police broke into the woman's house and shot the wrong person, shot an innocent person. Of course you're going to get a good result out of that. The garage collapse. Garages aren't supposed to collapse. Of course you're going to get a good result out of that. But that's not the way it is.
yeah,
And with the Kathryn Johnston, you had to it's all law and facts, but the law was, a significant obstacle for you to overcome to get justice. And in the sinkhole disaster, the fact that it caved in, and as Robin said, all the defense firms in Atlanta were involved, and they're saying either, well, how did we know? It's not our fault. This, stuff happens, and that's the thing really that makes a great trial lawyer. Is
well,
those
the
kind
only
of
way they
things.
could defend it was blame each other.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yep.
And I told the fellow that associated me in it, he wanted to go to the couple of depositions. I go to the first deposition. We took a big honcho at Marriott. And I mean, the other thing is some of these firms some of the lawyers were construction lawyers, and they arbitrate. You know what I mean? And they arbitrate, they blame each other, right?
Mhm.
Well, there was no way they could do anything but blame each other because they each had independent acts which were damaging. Our job was to mesh them all together. We started the deposition of the Marriott guy, and he started blaming the engineers in the city before in less than 5 minutes. In my deposition, I barely asked him his name before he started putting it on the other guy. And my buddy who doesn't do any litigation leans over and says, "Well, it didn't take long for that to start, and it only got worse." But
Well,
and then
talking about they blamed each other. There was, after the settlement of the main case, there was a contribution case.
Tenzar, I think, sued the city.
Tenzar,
Yeah.
Tenzar sued the city for contribution back when we had actual contribution among joint tort feasors. And I read that case. Went up to Court of Appeals. I read that case, and the company that submitted that safety net was told to go back and do it cheaper. So the dude went back and said, "Okay, I'll do a cheaper version." So it was even worse. It was just awful facts. Just
It was, and here's one really icing on the cake for Tenzar. My expert up at Purdue, I sent him the guy who designed the Tenzar had graph paper with all these mathematical calculations on it, 12 pages long, regarding how he decided to design the safety net as he did. And I sent it to Professor Haar, he says, "Well, I need to explain this to you if you're going to take this guy's deposition." I said, "Well, I want to take his deposition and I want to nail this engineer." He says, "Well, I got plenty here for you to nail him." He said, he'll tell you that he's never done this design before, which they did. They readily admitted that. But he said, not only that, Nick, but he says, I get to his condo down in Miami. It was wintertime. And so I stayed down there for about 3 days, and he has his stuff laid out on his study table, and he goes, "How's your trig?" And I said, "Trig what?" I said, "You mean trigonometry?" He said, "Yeah." I said, "It's non-existent. I left that in 11th grade. So you're going to have to start from scratch on me." Anyway, he went through and explained that to me. And by the time you got to about the ninth page, he made mathematical errors. It wasn't enough that it was a negligent design. It's a negligent manufacture. You know what I mean? I mean, it was wrong. So I took his deposition for 2 days, and toward the end of the last day, I said, all right, let's go through this. We go through line by line, each explaining the math to me, cosine, sine, cosine, all this stuff. And then, flipping over, okay, that's good. We'll go to the next page. That's good. Let's go to the next page. Finally gets to about the 9th page, and he stalls. And he says, this can't be right. I said, you got a problem with it? He said, yeah, there's a mistake in here. There's a series of mistakes in here.
Oh,
I said, yeah, there is. There is. Now, at this point, only me and him know what we're talking about. The other 8 lawyers or whatever, they hadn't even looked at this thing, And so he literally lost it. And they had their lawyer, they were represented by Drew Echo, good lawyer, said, can we take a break? I said, let me just finish a couple more questions and then sure. And they took an hour with him, and came back, and he just said he screwed up. It was not only was it designed the first time he'd ever done it, but he did it wrong. Mathematically incorrect, wouldn't work. So that was the end of that. Yeah.
Yeah.
But it was, it's the only case I've had that there was a article in one of the editions of the Wall Street Journal. But it was the classic case of corporate greed intersecting with municipal incompetence. I mean, it was all in, perfect storm.
Yeah. And again, a very complex case that you had to learn all kinds of different subject matters. And I think that's one of the great things I like about being a plaintiff's trial lawyer is you learn all kinds of stuff that you never would otherwise.
No, it was fascinating.
Yeah.
And not only that, as a native Atlantan, the whole facts around it and how it developed over time was curious to me. I read up on the city's construction history, and it was beautiful. I mean, aside from the fact that it was a terrible thing.
Yeah.
But if I ever were to write a book, it would take up a pretty big chapter in the book.
I'm going to encourage you to do that.
Absolutely.
And speaking of, if you're dealing with the city of Atlanta sewer system, I mean, I'm afraid there may be another sinkhole that we don't know about. About to happen.
Yeah, you remember how long that area was down for the repair? I mean, it took years. I mean, they rebuilt that whole thing.
Yeah, years.
Yeah.
Another area of law that you are kind of known for and kind of the go-to guy, I know I've referred an aviation case to you, is aviation law. And that is a very unique type of law that not all plaintiffs' attorneys just, when they get a case, oh yeah, I can handle an aviation case. You, though, have handled several. And I'm curious about, how did you get into aviation law? What was the first case, and what is so unique about aviation law, and what did you have to learn to be able to handle one of those cases?
Well, I tell you, I'm not a regular aviation lawyer. You know what I mean? I mean, there are Andy Sherfius is one.
Yeah, right.
He did a lot of that.
Sure.
So I was approached by the first one I had. There was a group down south of Atlanta called Sky Warriors, and you might have heard of them. They would use these old jets from World War II to put laser shooting capability in them, and people would go up. They had the canopy on them, and one sitting in front, one sitting in the back. They were like, I forget, T-54s or T-45s. I forget what they were, and they would engage in this shooting stuff. It was called dogfighting. People would do that for fun. I mean, that raises your first question on what's the value of life. But so these guys were Delta pilots. There were two Delta pilots went up there, and they were having a dogfight against just some regular guys. And when you do these dogfights, they have a camera behind you videotaping what you're doing, okay, and what you're seeing. And in the middle of the dogfight, the left wing popped off of the flight that my client's husband was in, and you could see it all. I mean, it popped off, it hit the roof, and you could see it fall off, and then the plane went down. You could see the guys just going like this because the canopy got knocked off, and then you follow it down, and then black. I mean, it was
Terrible.
It's hard to even talk about it.
Yeah,
really.
sounds
Terrible. But and so we sued Sky Warriors and the manufacturer of the plane, it was Raytheon, formerly Beach. But the manufacturing issue didn't go very far because of statute of limitations. We held them in for settlement purposes at the end. We won summary judgment and held them in and got it settled at some point, but we were somewhat limited. I mean, most of the money had to come from the flight school, and they were limited in what they had. So that was really my first one. And I had, 2 or 3 others that were they always claimed pilot error. They couldn't claim it in that one, but they always claimed pilot error. But when I got involved in that case, the lawyer representing the other decedent was a guy by the name of Dan Barks, who was with the firm by the name of Spicer Krause out of New York. And they were big time aviation lawyers. So really, I worked on that case with Dan and another case with Dan. The biggest one, I guess, was the one that occurred in Thompson, Georgia, involving a slew of defendants, which was where a doctor and 4 of his staff members got killed in that plane. They were with a group out of Augusta that had offices throughout the Southeast, and they were coming home from one of their offices. I believe it was in North Carolina or Tennessee, and they had a new plane, and the pilot was not up to speed on it, and he came in too fast, tried to lift up and go around and hit a Georgia power pole. And that raised a whole nother specter because
right. Now you've got Georgia Power as a defendant for putting a pole so close to a
and worse than
runway.
Hugh McNatt, my good buddy, God bless him, represented Georgia Power, and I'd had a couple of Georgia Power cases with him before, and we had some great lawyers in that case. Buddy Brown from what is now my firm, a firm I'm associated with, Cunningham Bounds. We had Bill Stone was in that. We had just a slew of Jamie. I can't remember Jamie's last name. He was an aviation lawyer out of Cleveland. And then you had a slew of lawyers for the defendants. Was Georgia Power. We sued the city and the county because they operated the airport. We sued some engineers that helped devise the airport. We sued the pilot, obviously, and they paid, eventually the limits. They had some pretty good limits. And then, so I called Hugh and I said, Hugh, I'm involved in this case. He said, yeah, I heard that. I'm glad you're in it, Nick. I said, I'm looking for, I forget the form. There's a form that you have to fill out and have approved if you're going to build within a certain distance of an airport and run the risk of being in the flight zone. I said, I can't find this form, Hugh. Can you send me a copy? He says, well, that Southern accent.
In that accent, yeah.
He says, that's the problem, Nick. I said, what's the problem? He says, I can't find it either. And they never
produced one. Yeah.
They never filed it. They had to admit that they didn't do it. So it was illegally placed. And I mean, the guy, when we had him in his deposition, which lasted a couple of days, he just coughed it out, and
that's kind of game over.
Yeah. And so it was really a matter of bringing the others in, and the airport had been warned. The FAA had been down there like 8 months before and said, hey, you need to check this. You need to give me some information on this because this, this pole looks to me like it's in the flight zone, and you haven't made the proper precautions. Gave them a year to report back. They didn't report back. Accident happened. So we had the city on the hook. We had the engineers on the hook. We had Georgia Power on the hook, and we had the pilot on the hook. So there was, and then we sued Milliken. No, that one we tried. At the end of the day, Milliken had scant liability, in that they provided the aviation easement. They had the property next door, and we settled with everybody, and we really made, I told Stone and Buddy, I said, let's just fold it up,
Yeah, got enough.
We got everything done. Let's go try it. And so we tried it. And I will say it was 2 weeks of a trial I really enjoyed, because it was complicated, a lot of experts, and then your question, I mean, you got to learn a good bit. It's another language. It's like medicine, and fortunately, it worked out well. But trying it was a 2-week trial. It didn't, you always learn something.
Sure.
I enjoyed doing it. We had everything covered, and the clients were taken care of. So it worked out well.
Well, Lester is either getting his pilot license or has already obtained it. I can't remember where you are in that journey, Lester, but
Flight school dropout, So
when I hear, well, good, because when I hear stories of that, I'm like, Lester, please don't do that. Don't.
I
fly.
wanted to be as comfortable in a cockpit as I was in a courtroom, and that took me 38 years. So I'm probably past in that. But I love flying. It's fun when you're with an experienced pilot, and I've had the privilege of I have my one corporate client is a special air services group, and I've flown a lot with them, so it's been fun. Those are great stories, Nick.
Yeah, they are great. My next question, I don't even know if you could answer it though, because you have so many, but is there one highlight of your career? Is there one shining moment where you would say that's the highlight, or do they all kind of feel that way?
No, I thought about that. I had a case against a show. Well, it's public, against Marta, who I used to represent back in the old days, and one of my former partners was handling it, and it was, it'd been 20 years since I'd represented Marta, but and it was a lady who got stabbed at the Peachtree Center MARTA station by a homeless person, and she fought him. She was she owned a store in Sandy Springs, was down checking out the merchandise mart for merchandise for her dress store in Sandy Springs. Tough gal, and she fought this homeless person, and and she ended up getting stabbed in the neck. And fortunately, it didn't hit the carotid artery or trachea or anything. So she only spent one night in Grady. But she was a tough woman, and it did affect her psyche. And she got some treatment, not much, a handful of psychiatric therapy sessions. And she made a great witness. And we had another good witness who was a security guard for the MART that provided some excellent testimony. But long story short, she only had 14,000 in meds, and this referring lawyer came to me early in the case, and I said I just didn't think it was worth pursuing, and I can't help you. Well, he went through and got close to trial, and he got a little cold feet and asked me to help. So we went in and came up with a different theory, and anyway, I went and tried it, and we got it. They offered us nothing, and so they brought in this expert who was a security expert, who was an engineer that was educated at Duke and taught at University of Texas, and he relied on statistics to crime rate. If Marta's crime rate is the safest place to be in the world.
You could sleep there and it'd be fine.
Yeah. And I didn't even take his deposition because they identified him so late, but I read some of his some of his stuff, and so he got up, testified, and I mean, he was so confident, that I didn't know what the hell I was doing, and I get up, and he had the crime rate at Marta 0.0001 or something, and I said, well, I said, do I said, I understand that's the crime rate. And then I pulled out an article that he wrote about, 3 murders at Walmart in a year. And it wasn't a big deal because they had so many people, he relied strictly on the crime rate. You know what I mean? And he said, well, the crime rate in that case was 0.00005. I said, well, can we, I said, well, can we agree on this? That for the 3 people that got killed, it was 100%.
100%.
And he was. That makes no sense. That's statistics. That doesn't have anything to do with statistics. I said, oh, I know that. And so it opened up the door for me to use something I'd wanted to use my entire trial career, and I wrote it down so I'd remember it correctly. It's a quote from Mark Twain that I used in my closing argument. I said, Mark Twain said, figures often beguile me, particularly when I have the arranging of them myself, in which the following remark applies with justice and force. There are 3 kinds of lies: lies, damn lies, and statistics. And then the court, the jurors were smiling. I knew I had them at that point, but they gave us a 7-figure verdict when we would have taken 250,
Yeah.
And so
That's great.
that was a fun time.
That sounds great.
Yeah.
Favorite moment?
Favorite moment is when you introduced me at the reception where I was given the Tradition of Excellence Award. It really was.
That was one of my favorite moments
Yeah.
too. I was proud to do it. That's for sure. We touched a little bit on this at the beginning. I want to just briefly get your thoughts on where we stand with the rule of law right now. We all know that we have a Department of Justice that ignores trial court orders from federal judges and ignores the rules, ignores the Constitution. And we've had a couple of justices on our podcast and from Georgia. And fortunately, we don't feel like that's happening in Georgia. We hope that stays like that. We don't feel like we're feeling that, but in other states, they are experiencing that. And I'm wondering your thoughts, since you've seen so much over the last 50 years. What are your thoughts about where we stand with the rule of law and what lawyers can do right now?
Well, I think we're in a very dangerous, difficult, and dark place, frankly. I just read a article by that conservative judge that speaks so eloquently about it. I mean, what he's doing to the law, combined with the military. I'm afraid we're headed toward, an authoritarian government. I'm not, I'm worried about it. The law is in danger of, like you say, being ignored, being abused, being circumvented. I read something recently, I think it was from John Meacham, where he was quoting Alexander Hamilton, who, when they finished the Constitution, said, well, with this experiment now, we're going to see how reason holds up against force. And that's where I think we are. And reason has a sense of fairness about it, requires a sense of fairness about it. And force is it can be anything. And I'm worried about it. What can lawyers do about it? I mean, we got to speak up. I'm thinking, I'm reading that that with the upcoming elections, which I'm sure we're going to run into allegations of fraud in the system, and I've heard that Democrats or the alternative parties are going to be recruiting lawyers to go to polls, and I'm thinking, if I'm up to it, I think we ought to retire. We ought to volunteer for
Yeah.
that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And so, I don't know. I mean, I worry about the Supreme Court. The district courts at the trial level seem to be understanding it.
Yeah.
But I worry about the delays and getting to the bottom of it, and the continuation of ignoring court orders. Ignored the Venezuela court order, about not sending those people down there, turning the
Yes.
planes around. They blatantly ignored it. They had no penalty for
Yeah.
it. But blatantly ignore the law of releasing the Epstein material, blew past that deadline, and no consequences for it. They just don't follow orders of court, and they abuse the judges. I mean, in what world do people talk about judges the way we allow judges to be talked about now?
No, and we are hearing that so many judges are feeling threatened, and there have been attacks on judges. There have been deaths of judges' families. So yeah, Lester and I both feel that way, that like you, we've got to speak up, keep pounding the rule of law, and that's the whole point of our democracy.
Well, so many people don't understand it. I mean, they just don't have an appreciation for. I mean, I've got some friends, that I've
Yeah.
socialized with, that have no concept of how important it is to have judges checking the politicians. I mean, I think in Georgia, we're fortunate, really. I think our judges here try to do their best to do what they see as right.
I totally agree. We've been able to maintain independent judiciary. We've just got to keep it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, Nick, our last question to every guest, we've reached that point, is how do you define justice?
I was reading, you might have gotten this too. This thing that used to be the Daily Report came out yesterday. You ever get that thing on the internet?
Yes, I do.
And sometimes they've got some pretty good stories in there. But I did read one, and I made a copy of part of it here, where I don't know if you saw it or not, where Justice Carla Wong McMillan spoke to the new. Did you see that?
I read it. Yeah, she spoke to the new admittees of the Supreme Court.
And talked about her mother being coming over from Hong Kong, as my grandparents did, and my wife's parents came from Greece. And she said to them, and I'm going to lead off with this if I might, because it wraps into how I define justice, which is really pretty simply. But she said the key to the concept that we're a nation of laws is the notion of equality, the belief that all men and women are created equal. No one is above the law, and no one is too low that they can't avail themselves of the law's protections. So, that made me think a little more about it. And I mean, I think justice relies on first an understanding that all people are equal, something that is losing a bit of, in this day and time. And that equality, I mean, it's just like everybody's on the same even playing field, just like the scales are even. And with justice comes fairness. So I think that I think with equality comes fairness. I think that equality and fairness together are what justice is all about. That's how I would define it. And for those of us who have spent a good part of our lives in the courtroom, we're very fortunate, because we know from our own experience that the only place, or perhaps the premier place, where equality and fairness come to play is when you bring in people who are suffering, people who are less fortunate in life, people who may be in despair, and put them in front of a jury with people who are the most fortunate in our society, be they a corporate citizen or an individual citizen, and they stand equally and get decisions made by a jury of individuals who make a decision based on truth, facts, and guidance from the law. And there, what are just a concept, justice is a concept, justice is a word, but for those of us who participate in that process, we get to see it happen. It's the personification of justice in front of our very eyes. And I think for that, as trial lawyers, we're pretty lucky and pretty fortunate because not everybody really understands it in practicality. I hope that is a answer. Good.
Well said. Well said.
Yes, totally agree, Nick. Great answer. Well, thank you, Nick. We appreciate your being with us. Let me remind our listeners, we've been talking with trial lawyer Nick Moraitakis of Cunningham Bounds Law Firm. You can find out more about Nick on his firm's website at cunninghambounds.com. Nick, thank you so much.
I appreciate it. It's all there. I mean, for not playing around on a Friday afternoon, which is what I usually do, being with you guys is the next best thing.
Awesome.
Y'all take care.
Thank you.
Great.
Bye-bye.
All right. Well, friends, this is the time in our program where Lester and I bring to you a news item that relates to the law in some way that catches our eye, and we want to share it with you. So, Lester, you're up first.
Well, we always look for stuff that's publications that are of current relevance. And so today I want to bring you something from the ABA Journal from June of 1950.
Oh, wow.
1950. And I was at an ABA Board of Governors meeting last week, and we had a speaker that referenced this piece, which I was familiar with, but it brought back to me, and I think it's of great current relevance. And it's from Robert H. Jackson, who was a Supreme Court Justice, U.S. Supreme Court Justice, was also the prosecutor at Nuremberg for the Allied forces. And he wrote a piece entitled The County Seat Lawyer. It's sort of a tribute to country lawyers. But I love this thing, and I just want to read a portion of it. Again, it was published in 1950, but I think it's as true today as it was then. And he talks about the vanishing country lawyer. And he says of that country lawyer, he decided not to specialize, nor did he pick and choose clients. He rarely declined service to worthy ones because of an inability to pay. Once enlisted for a client, he took his obligation seriously. He insisted on complete control of the litigation. He was no mere hired hand, but he gave every power and resource to the cause. He had identified himself with the client's cause fully, sometimes too fully. He would fight the adverse party, fight counsel, fight every hostile witness, fight the court, fight public sentiment, fight any obstacle. He never quit. He could think of motions for every purpose under the sun, and he made them all. He moved for new trials, appealed, and in the end, if he lost, he joined the client at the tavern in damning the judge, which is the last right of any in closing any unsuccessful case, and I have officiated at many. But he loved his profession. He had a real sense of dedication to the administration of justice. He held his head high as a lawyer. He rendered and exacted courtesy, honor, and straightforwardness at the bar. He respected the judicial office deeply, demanded the high standards of competence and disinterestedness and dignity, despite all political use of or trifling, despised all political use or trifling with judicial power. And he had an affectionate regard for every man who filled his exacting prescription of a just judge. The law to him was like a religion, and its practice was more than a means of support. It was a mission. He was not always popular in his community, but he was respected. Unpopular minorities and individuals often found him their only mediator and advocate. He was too independent to court the populace. He thought of himself as a leader and a lawgiver, not as a mouthpiece. He lived well, worked hard, and died poor. Often his name was in a generation or two forgotten. It was from this brotherhood that America has drawn its statesmen and its judges. A free, self-governing republic stands as a monument for the little known and unremembered, as well as the famous men of our profession. And that's from Robert H. Jackson. And I think it is, again, what it talks about, what it means to, I'll say, hold the office of being a trial lawyer.
Yeah. You know, it reminded me of, or who came to mind was Justice Bob Benham from your town where you
Yes.
practice, Cartersville, Georgia. And I keep thinking of that famous scene that really happened. Sounds like a movie, but when I say justice because he was a justice on the Supreme Court, but at the time, Attorney Benham walking down the street to the courthouse in Cartersville, Georgia, and people would start walking behind him and they'd say, Attorney Benham's going to court. Attorney Benham's going to court. And that, what you just read, kind of evokes that image for me.
It does. And we were talking with Nick earlier when you introduced him at the Tradition of Excellence. I introduced Robert Benham when he got it. And one of the things I likened it to was the scene in Kill a Mockingbird. You know, when you walk down the street, and it's when Atticus Finch walked out of the courtroom and they say, stand up, scout, your father's passing. Mm-hmm. And so we don't always get that kind of respect now. And unfortunately, some of our profession don't deserve it. But for those of us who,
right, that's true.
The rest of us were, I hope, striving to preserve it. So I apologize for bringing a over half century old article, but I thought it was pertinent to the time.
I agree. It is pertinent. It applies very much right now. Talking about somebody who doesn't deserve a claim, I think, is my story about a judge in Texas, in Bexar County, Texas, Judge Speedlin Gonzalez.
It's Bahar. I was just there.
Oh, Bahar. Okay, I didn't know how to say it.
We did a tour we did the river tour, and you can see the courthouse. And the riverboat guide said, if you call it Bexar, people will know you're not from here.
Okay.
I apologize for interrupting you, Robin, but I couldn't.
Thank you. No, I appreciate that. So this is San Antonio.
It is. Yes, right where I came from. I came in from it Monday.
Have you heard about this judge? Did they talk about it on your? Well, she, in an incident in 2024, Judge Speedlin Gonzalez ordered a defense attorney in her courtroom to be placed in handcuffs and seated in the jury box. The dispute between the judge and attorney Elizabeth Russell escalated during a motion to revoke probation hearing. After the defendant pleaded true to one of the allegations, the attorney Russell cut in and asked for a moment to confer with her client. And that's according to the transcript. And the defendant, her client, functions below average intellectually, a source told this newspaper. But apparently the request to have a moment with her client sent the judge off the handle, ordered the attorney to be handcuffed and put in the jury box, and said to the attorney, you're not going to be allowed to be argumentative and argue just for the sake of argument. Take her into custody, put her in the box. We're not having this hearing this way. So fast forward to now, a Bahar grand jury has indicted her. And she's been indicted on charges of unlawful restraint of a peace officer or judge, a second-degree felony, and official oppression, a Class A misdemeanor. A grand jury handed down the indictment on January 29 in Texas's 379th Judicial District Court. And she's been suspended from the bench, obviously, but now indicted. and it's all related to this 2024 incident with San Antonio attorney Elizabeth Russell. I don't. This should be on the TMZ program. Judges Run Amok. I mean, I don't know where you get off. An attorney wants to speak to her client, and the judge says handcuff her. What is wrong? I mean,
and I think, we are in this country on many different levels, looking at what vesting certain people with power, what the results of that is. And obviously some can handle it well and some handle it like the San Antonio judge did.
yes.
But it's hard to see really what, it's one thing when you feel, if you've got power and you feel offended or disrespected or whatever else, but it's hard for me to see how any rational person would feel disrespected by that,
Me either. And I'm thinking of the deputy who, surely the deputy, when the judge says handcuff that attorney, surely the deputy was like, what? I don't want to handcuff that attorney. She didn't do anything. Well, we'll see what happens to this judge. But doesn't look good.
Interesting. That's an interesting one. That really is.
Yeah.
And when they meet in the tavern about that case, the cursing may be justified. I love the one I did. I love the fact that you want to cuss the judge in the tavern, but you have the utmost respect for judicial authority, both of which can be true, and I think frequently are true amongst the bar.
But you don't waive your right to cuss the judge.
That's right. That's exactly right.
Well, it's been a great program. We want to thank our sponsor, the Georgia Civil Justice Foundation, and our producer, Philip Hoover. You can learn more about Lester Tate at aikentate.com and more about me, Robin Frazer Clark, at gatriallawyers.net. And I want to let you know that we do appear on YouTube now and have our own YouTube channel or whatever you call it. And I looked, and we now have over 176,111 views on YouTube.
Wow, that's great. We don't even, I don't. Robin always looks gorgeous, but I don't even dress up for you on YouTube. So,
you're sweet. All right, Lester.
All right.
Till next time.
See you in court.
You've been listening to the See You in Court podcast, brought to you by the Georgia Civil Justice Foundation. Remember, justice is a shared journey, and your engagement makes all the difference. For further insight and resources, visit our website at www.seeyouincourtpodcast.org. Subscribe to our YouTube channel at See You in Court Podcast for additional content. And don't forget to engage with our community on facebook.com/seeyouincourtpodcast. Special thanks to our producer, Philip Hoover. I'm Fred Smith, Executive Director of the Georgia Civil Justice Foundation. You may learn more about the foundation at www.fairplay.org. Until next time, we'll see you in court.